Hello, class. So this will be part two of positivism, our unit on positivism. So I'm going to go and share a whiteboard with you. So today we're looking at two authors, Eliza Orzeszkowa and Maria Konopnicka, who, as I mentioned in the earlier lecture, are central figures in what is known as third wave feminism in Poland, which comes directly out of positivist ideals about universal suffrage, equal rights for minorities and women. It had a strong influence from Western traditions, where with other countries were finally giving women the vote, and other rights were finally coming into existence for minorities and women. Um, the earlier waves of feminism in Poland, the first and second waves, I guess you could say, were the results of, I'm going to put this all in parentheses, earlier waves, were kind of the results of the insurrections and the uprisings that I mentioned in previous um, lectures. Um, but even though there were ideas about you know, coming out of, in this time of struggle and upheaval during the insurrections and the uprisings, ideas about a new place for women in society were, being considered and discussed. But really, both these earlier waves really maintained this traditional role of women. Um, and so, in my opinion, they were really rather reactionary, and not, um, progressive at all. And a really good symbol, I guess you could say, of these earlier waves of feminism can all be summed up in, can be embodied, I guess, in an idea of Matka Polska. So this is often translated as Polish mother, but it's not really Polish mother. A better translation would be mother Pole. Um, Polka is just the Polish for woman, a Polish woman. So this symbol of Matka Polka is an outgrowth of the cult of Mary. So the Virgin Mary was and is still very important to Catholic Poland. She was actually in 1717. She was crowned Queen of Poland, and then in 2017, the 300th anniversary of this, she was recrowned. The conservative government of Poland um, reaffirmed, you know, their belief in the traditional um, roots of Polish Catholic culture. So this is again a rather reactionary uh, ideology, and symbol. Um, so the these earlier waves of feminism, this reference to Matka Polka. So Matka Polka is the ideal Polish woman. Well, first of all, she's a mother. And during the insurrections and the uprisings, women did come to play a larger role in society because the men were either off fighting or trying to start a revolution, or they'd been exiled to Siberia. And so the Polish woman was seen as the gatekeeper of Polish culture at this time. She was at home. She was the one of the few people left in the nation, or what was the nation, and she was then expected to take on a more active role. She defended the home front. She cultivated Polish culture and language with her children. She was expected to take again an active role in society. However, even though this is supposed to be some kind of new image of Polish womanhood, where they become active, and members, active members of the Polish society. Um, the thing is that when the men came home, the matka Polka, this ideal Polish woman, was then expected to go back into the home, to go back into the kitchen, to then take again take a subservient role to the man. So even though these first two waves are called Polish feminism, it's not really until third wave feminism with positivism that we get something actually truly progressive as far as women's rights are concerned. Um, so just a few historical notes about this third wave feminism. Um, Adam Wielicki in 1870 publishes an article called Niezależ. Oh, I forget. I can't do the. That's weird. I can't do that letter for some reason. I have to like copy and paste it. So I don't know why it does that. Um, Nie, niezależność kobiety, which translates to woman's independence. So this was an article in a journal called Scholarly Review. And it called for it demanded a radical it was radical demands for the equality of the sexes. It called for universal suffrage, the rights of women in education and governance, all that kind of stuff. Um, Edward Broniński, there's a dot missing somewhere in there, I'm pretty sure. In 1873, publishes O prawach kobiety, on women's rights. Um, I did not note down what journal this was in, but anyway, he publishes an article O prawach kobiety, and again, this is about the equality of the sexes in every domain: home, work, governance, education. In let's see here, Leon Bielinski, I'm pretty sure it's probably Bielinski, in 1874, gives a series of lectures titled On Women's Work from the Economic Standpoint. So this title itself, is a really good indicator of the reliance on positivist philosophies, right? Capitalism itself, right, is a positivist product, and so he he talks about the importance of women being equal in the workplace because it just makes economic sense, right? If half the country is at home not making money and not paying taxes, that's hurting us as a society, right? As a nation. So it's this very practical, capitalist kind of view on women's rights. And this was at the University of. Oh, I hate it when I do that. I just have to do it here. These were lectures given at the University of Lviv, which is now in Ukraine. At the time, it was it was a Polish city originally. It was built by Poles, but because of history, it's now in Ukraine. Um, and this is important because finally in 1874, Um, no, I'm sorry, in 1897. So 20 years later, more than 20 years later, the University of Lviv um, graduates the first graduates women for the first time. Um, and yes, so now something you'll notice about all these things is that all these articles are by men. So um, there are women writing at the time, but men's writing is still it's the writing of men that's still given any kind of weight. So anyway, so yes, this would all be considered. This is all taking place at this time. These are all very positivist ideals and part of the positivist program. Um, and what feminism comes right out of it. Equality for all really really becomes the catchword of the positivist movement. Okay, so I'm going to erase this. You can come back to it and take a screenshot of it. And the first author we read for today is Eliza Olszewska. She lived 1841 to 1910. She fought for Polish independence her entire life. And the sad irony, tragic irony of her death date, 1910, is the fact that just 8 years later, Poland would be free. Poland would finally have its independence after almost 200 years. Um, and she is still very popular in Poland today. Her writings are still published. She is part of the core curriculum for public education. Every student in Poland reads Ostrowskowa at some point. So we read for today from her, Miss Antonina. 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 Miss Antonina. So some themes to consider with this story. Um, Obviously, women's rights. This is very important to this story. But also, class struggle is very important. Is a very important theme to this story. So the main character is not, she is a woman, and those struggles are particular to being a woman, especially at this time. But she's also from the lower class, and this is also part of her struggle, part of her uh, part of the uh, can't think of a synonym for struggle, the struggle of her life, so the way she has to work, who she has to work for, the conditions she's put in when she works for certain people. This is all an important theme to this story. The importance of education is another theme to consider here, especially the education of women. This is a particular importance to this story. It illustrates the possibility, what's possible with a self-educated woman. Illustrates woman's desire to be intelligent, to be taken as seriously as a man. So these are all important themes to this story and to really Orzechkova's oeuvre. So just a couple things about the story that I'd like you to think about while reading it or looking over it again. Is she constantly brings up, well, not constantly, but she brings up a few times the idea of having 12 daughters and making them 12 professors. So what do you make of this? So this is and I don't have a definitive answer for this, but it's just really interesting. I've gotten some really interesting answers over the years, and not to tell you what to think, but one interesting answer from a student in one of my past semesters was the fact that the number 12. Why is it 12? And it could it could be connected to the 12 apostles, right? So you have, if she's if there's a connection there, then we would read her as a Christ figure, and that's not a stretch, considering her life of sacrifice and whatnot. But and then also white professors, and this is a little, yeah, you have to consider the time that this was written. It's a lot different these days, but at the time, university professors were seen as guardians of culture and real authorities and experts that one listened to and trusted. Um, maybe not They may not have held, you know as just professors, they may not have been may not have held like governmental power, but the power they held over shaping culture and society was real. Now there's a lot different than these days, where I have a PhD and I have to work at three different colleges, and I have to teach like 7 classes a year and have like sometimes 200 students. Um, this is it's a lot different these days. We're not nearly as respected as we were 200 years ago. Um, but considering that time, to have 12 daughters become 12 professors who are, like I said, guardians of culture, to have women in this kind of position would be really revolutionary, especially in education, not just, but and also in society and culture at large. To have all 12 daughters of hers become these holders of cultural power, I guess you could say. Um, so a few other little points on page 208. There's a great quote: "All the walls on earth are cold, all hearts alien." Um, so, what do you make of this? This is very pessimistic, and it's a result of her experiences. She, beginning of her life she starts off educating young children, and she gets connected. A bond is created between her and the children she teaches. But this is a hard-nosed world where, when the family gets as much out of her as they possibly can, and gets as much value out of her as they can, they send her packing, right? There's no, as far as the families are concerned, there is no connection. The only thing that she has for them is what they can teach their young children, and when she reaches the limit of her knowledge and her ability, they get rid of her, right? No matter the emotional bond and attachment she's created, between the children and her, for the families, that doesn't matter, right? They give her as little as possible to get as much work out of her as possible, and is that is like the core of of Marx, right? If you read Karl Marx, the whole idea of capitalists, um, getting as much value for as little pay as possible out of the proletariat. She is the and she is the ideal proletariat, in this story. On page 209 and in a couple other places, there's the mention of the Star of Knowledge. Now, the only reason I bring this up is because I have no idea what this is. I did a lot of Google searches, and if you if you do a Google search for Star of Knowledge, like the first things that pop up are a lot of pagan and mystical ideas, a lot of you know, um, a lot of magic type images pop up, a lot of pentagrams. Um, But reading it, it almost sounds to me like a kind of stand-in for the Philosopher's Stone. And this, like, the Philosopher's Stone is not, what Harry Potter has. The Philosopher's Stone is this really old alchemist idea that you could create this thing that basically gives you immortality and ultimate wisdom and knowledge. Um, and so, is the Star of Knowledge that? I'm not sure what this is. It every time I read it, I just have to ask myself again, what does she mean by this? So I think there's several different possible interpretations. Page 214. This is just something that I find kind of funny because I can relate. She talks about the German philosophers and how she struggles with them, but she still reads them, trying to figure them out. And who this is referring to is more than likely it's Kant and Hegel. So these are two very famous German philosophers that are almost utterly incomprehensible, especially Hegel. It is really difficult to understand Hegel. I've tried reading him, and I have to read other people's ideas about his ideas because I can't make heads or tails of what he has to say. So they're really well known, but they're completely ununderstandable. It's almost impossible. So whenever I read the story, I always kind of chuckle when I come across that because I feel for her. I know exactly how she feels not being able to make any headway into these two philosophers. And then page 218. This is where we really see her change from being an open, um, naive, maybe naive, and excited person into a jaded and suspicious person, right? So her experiences throughout her career had, turn her from this excited, um, you know, heartfelt person who wants to, who makes these connections with the children she teaches. And after she's kicked out of several houses, she becomes jaded and suspicious of people, right? More closed off. However, but despite this, she retains her desire to learn and educate. At the end of the story, we find her volunteering her time basically to teach poor children who can't afford a tutor. And then finally, one last thing to keep in mind is the fact that her illness is a result of living in unhealthy rooms in bad conditions. So the family she stays with, um, to, to teach their children, like as I mentioned just a little bit ago, they give her as little as possible to get as much work out of her as possible. And this ends up leading to her illness, right? This results in her illness. She's expected to live in terrible conditions in drafty rooms, and they and you know even though she does as much as she can for the children. And this is very much a comment on the state of the proletariat, especially at this time. You really, at this time, you start to get ideas of Marx coming into popularity. More people are talking about the proletariat and unions, and this will all come to a head in the Russian Revolution not long after. Okay, so I'm going to erase this now. So take a screenshot. And the second author we looked at for today is Maria von Konopnicka. She lived 1842 to 1910. She died the same year as Oshakova. They lived almost the exact same time. Again, she is very popular even today. She was very popular at her time. And she is also one of the, maybe not founders, but one of the main figures of this third wave Polish feminism. So I wanted to share with you this really curious poem of hers that she wrote. Um, it's really kind of odd. It's called the Rota, R-O-T-A, and I'll put that in our notes in a second. But um, so this is a poem she writes. Here, we'll just go up here. 1908. Um, and this is a so something to keep in mind with this. This is virulently nationalistic. But you have to keep in mind the situation, and this poem first, and then song later, was written as a uh, comment against. You'll remember from the previous lecture the Prussian Kulturkampf, trying to get rid of Polish language and culture and whatnot in the west of Poland. So she writes this poem, and at the time, you wouldn't think much of it, but people still recite it and sing it today. It was actually considered, it was kind of considered an unofficial anthem for a long time of the Polish nation. Um, but you have especially even like older people today who will like stand up and sing this song, and it is in the context of today, it is really nationalistic. um, so the first couple things, right? It's all about where we come from as Poles, from the line of the Piast. So help us God. We won't let the enemy to the last drop in our veins. We will defend our spirits, etc., etc., etc. Till into dust and ash shall fall the Teutonic windstorm. So Teutonic means German. So then we get into this. This is the stanza. Nie będzie Niemiec pludam w twarz, nie dzieci nam Germaniu, orędzie wstanie hufiec nasz, duch będzie nam hetmaniu, pójdziem, gdy zabrzmi złoty róg. So, the German won't spit in our face, nor Germanize our children. Our host, like army, will arise in arms. The Spirit will lead the way, the Holy Spirit. We will arise when the golden horn sounds. So the golden horn is this very old Polish myth about it's this object. It's a horn. It's a golden horn, and when it's blown, all of Poland's enemies will fall. And so it's very rooted in this old mythic ideas of God made objects and whatnot. Um, and so now again written in 18 something something, or no, 1908. This has a perfectly fine context, right? This is like Prussia is trying to get rid of our language, is trying to get rid of our culture. We're not going to stand for it. Great. In 2021, when old people or clean shaven, bald guys in tracksuits stand up and sing this. This has a completely different context and meaning. So I just wanted to share that with you. It's just a really curious piece of Polish culture that I still find kind of funny sometimes, like funny in a kind of a weird way. Okay, so the first, let me share another whiteboard with you. So the first of her stories we looked at for today is Still Life. So you may have heard, you may know what a still life is. So if you've never heard this, still life is a genre of painting. And it's basically just like it's described. It means a painting of something that is not alive, that doesn't move, right? So it could be like a bowl of fruit. That's a very popular subject for still life painting. It could be, there's a whole genre category of this of game, like game birds and animals, like after being hunted, lying on a table. I mean, you'll find paintings like that all the place. Rocks; those are still life um, um, subjects for paintings. Um, the curious, this is now, if you don't speak Polish, you kind of miss something here. Um, Still life means, right, that it's not moving, right? That's what you're painting. It's something that isn't moving, that's not alive. But in Polish, still life is translated as Martwa Natura. And this is actually the title, the original title of the Polish, in Polish of the story, Martwa Natura. And what this literally means is dead nature. So this is just much more blunt about it, right? Still life is kind of euphemistic almost, but in the Polish it's just blunt. I'm painting, this is dead nature. This is not, if it's a bowl of fruit, it's fruit that's been picked. If it's flowers that have been picked and put in a vase. If it's wild game that has been shot, it's dead, it's lying on the table. Or a rock's not alive, right? So it's dead nature. So then I think it, I don't know that it would change any meaning you find in the story, but it adds a layer to the story, right? If you think about the story, right, it takes place um, in a at a funeral, right? A participant of the funeral or someone witnessing the funeral describes the scene, right? And if you'll note, the narrator takes no part in it whatsoever. The narrator is just describing it. So it's like you could almost see it like the narrator is an artist painting up, the picture of the story, right? Um, Painting the image of the story for us to view. The narrator never interacts with anyone. The narrator just witnesses and gives details, right? Very much like a still life painting. Um, so consider this when reading the story. Um, some important themes. Well, the most important theme, I think, is the issue of class and the mistreatment of the poor by the upper classes. So the dead person for whom the funeral is being done was an impoverished farmer, probably a peasant. Um, the old mother, grandmother, who it's her son. She wants to give him as nice a burial as possible, and she's everyone around her is made to feel bad. It tries to make her feel bad about it. It tries to make her feel bad about the fact that they have to take time out of their day to just have a funeral for this unimportant peasant. So class is very important element of this story. And the second story, I always keep in, even though I really don't know what to make of it. Um, but I always leave it in because it's very short, and sometimes I get really cool readings of it from students. So let's see if you guys have anything interesting to say about it. Um, I'll give you a couple, I don't know, directions to go if you've to look into it. So what is a vignette then? So a vignette is like a fable. It's kind of like a fable. So I don't know if you know Aesop's fables. I read these as a kid, but I mean, we didn't have the internet back then. So Aesop's fables are like um, it's always with animals. There are always animals involved, like the fox and the sour grapes. There's tons of other fable stories from Aesop. Aesop was an ancient Greek. So a fable is supposed to teach a lesson, right? So there has to be some kind of lesson in this. Now, what is the lesson? That's the question. Um, just a couple things. I mean, I should make you look this up. That's what you should do as readers, is look things up. But I'll give you a few things. So the Helots, you may not know who the Helots were. So the Helots were the slaves of the Spartans. So we know who the Spartans were. So when the Spartans really started growing in power, um, they enslaved basically a neighboring Greek city-state. They were called the Helots. And they were basically used as sport sometimes, like hunting sport. Um, Actually, once a year, the Spartans would declare war on the Helots. They were an enslaved people, but to keep them, you know, in line, they would declare war on them, and it was basically, it was open season on any slaves that had, quite often what you found happening back then actually was like if if a Spartan father had taken on a Helot mistress, and the son like this, then that would be the Helot the son would target during this war of the year. So it's a very dark piece of ancient Greek history. Um, and another thing to keep in mind is how this is very similar to the Saint Christopher story. So you may not know who Saint Christopher was. He was actually he's no longer a saint. The Catholic Church finally got rid of feast of Saint Christopher because it was right out of pagan mythology. It was one of those instances where when Christians moved into an area and there was like some kind of pagan myth among the people, they would basically say, "Oh no, this is a saint of ours, and that's who you're worshiping or whatnot." Like Santa Claus. I mean that it's similar to that. But anyway, the Saint Christopher story is there's a giant, um, not a Jack of the Beanstalk giant, but like a 8 foot, 9 foot tall guy, and he lives next to he lives next to a river because that's where he makes his money. There's no crossing around the river, so what he does is people pay him for him to carry them across the river. So he puts people on his shoulders, carries them across the river, and they pay him. So one day, this little boy comes, and he asks to be taken across the river, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be that big of a deal. Christopher puts him on his back. He starts trying to cross the river, and as he crosses the river, the boy gets heavier and heavier and heavier. Um, and Christopher thinks they're about to drown, and finally he struggles and gets him to the other side. And it's revealed that the boy is actually Christ, and the weight that Christopher was feeling was the weight of the world's sins on the Christ child, being weighed down more and more. So that's the idea of the Christopher story. So again, I still don't know what to make of this. Um, let's assume that it's discussing some kind of central ethic or theme of the positivist program. What that ethic or theme might be, I can't tell you. That's for you to think about. So that's it for the lecture for today. I will get this posted as soon as possible. Take care. Bye bye.